This is the Silk Road, an ancient trade network which connected China with Europe. Metals, cotton, teas, ivory, porcelain, spices, ideas and inventions were shared by traders who exchanged goods along these routes. Arguably the easternmost point of the Silk Road is Beijing, and the westernmost point is traditionally accepted to be Rome. In a straight line, these 2 points are about 8,100 kilometers apart, but no single trader would have covered this entire distance. Rather, the goods were passed along from merchant to merchant from one settlement to the next. As such, there were many different cities and outposts which facilitated this trade network. Smack in the center of the perfect halfway point between east and west is the city of Samarkand in the country which today is known as Uzbekistan. Samarkand is referred by some as the heart of the Silk Road. Similarly to ancient Rome, Samarkand is more than 2,700 years old and has seen numerous empires rise, fall, conquer and destroy it, including those led by Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan and others. It is a fascinating, immensely complex place, the history of which is not pretty because it cannot be neatly explained or summarized in a paragraph. After all, it was pretty much at the very center of the ancient world, and as such, it's almost impossible to do it justice. But we can try. When did Samarkand first take shape? How many empires has the region of Uzbekistan seen rise and fall? How many great leaders have come and gone? And who built this magnificent place? Let's roll. This area is known as Afrasiyab. It is the oldest part and the ruined site of the ancient and medieval city of Samarkand. It was located on a high ground for defensive reasons, south of a river valley and north of a large fertile area which has now become part of the city of Samarkand. Archaeological excavations conducted within it and the city limits have found 40,000-year-old evidence of human activity dating back to the Upper Paleolithic period, while actual consistent habitation within Afrasiyab has been dated to between 7th and 6th centuries BC, so about 2,700 years ago. In the 4th century BC, Samarkand was known as Marakanda and was the capital of Sogdiana, an ancient Iranian civilization in Central Asia, which at different times included territories located in present-day Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. The Sogdians lived as a nomadic people and played an important part as the middleman in the ongoing trade of the Silk Road. The first known conquests of the region came in the form of Cyrus the Great, and as such the Sogdian region became a part of the Achaemenid Empire between 1550 and 1330 BC. The Achaemenid Empire reached its greatest extent under Xerxes I, who conquered most of northern and central Greece, including the city of Athens in 480 BC. The empire was larger than any previous empire in history, spanning a total of 5.5 million square kilometers. Then in 1329, a new force arose in the west and took the Persian world by storm, led by none other than Alexander the Great. While this incursion resulted in significant damage to the city of Samarkand, the new Hellenistic governance paved the way for recovery and renewal as a new age dawned upon the region, meaning Samarkand was infused with Greek elements in its arts, architecture and culture. After Alexander's death, the task of governing Samarkand was passed down from one empire to next. Amongst these were the Seleucid Empire, 312 BC to 63 BC. It was founded following the division of Macedonian Empire established by Alexander. The Seleucid Empire was a major center of Hellenistic culture, privileging Greek customs and language, while generally tolerating the wide variety of local traditions. Then, as the Seleucid Empire shattered, came the Greco-Bactrian Kingdom between 256 and 125 BC, which still defined the easternmost part of the Hellenistic world. But it too collapsed as it could not sustain all the wars which it was involved in, having pushed this far to the east. And then the Kushan Empire came in to fill the void between 30 BC and 375. It was an empire which blended together many different cultures and beliefs, as it spread to encompass much of modern-day territory of Afghanistan, Pakistan and northern India. The rule of the Kushans linked the seagoing trade of the Indian Ocean with the commerce of the Silk Road through the long civilized Indus Valley. The loose unity and comparative peace of such a vast empire encouraged long-distance trade, brought Chinese silk to Rome, and created strings of flourishing urban centers. Then in 260, the Sassanians rose to power, who were the last imperial Persian dynasty before the Muslim conquest of the region. The Sassanians ruled until the mid-7th century, from 224 to 651, making it the longest-lived Persian dynasty. The Sassanians brought forth Manichaeism, a religion founded by a prophet called Mani in the 3rd century, and Samarkand became a significant site of this religion's propagation. Manichaeism taught an elaborate dualistic cosmology describing the struggle between good and spiritual world of light and evil, material world of darkness. Manichaeism was quickly successful and spread throughout Aramaic-speaking regions. It thrived between the 3rd and 7th centuries until the fall of the Sassanids, and at its height was one of the most widespread religions in the world. Manichaean churches and scriptures existed as far east as China and as far west as the Roman Empire. It was briefly the main rival to Christianity before the spread of Islam snuffed it out. After the Sassanian Empire abruptly collapsed because of too many wars and inner turmoil, it was succeeded by a number of nomadic tribes, such as the Zionites, ruling between 350 and 375, the Kedarites, ruling between 457 and 1509, and eventually the so-called White Huns, the Hephthalites. But in the 6th century AD, the first Turkish Khanate came to power. This Khanate expanded from the Mongolian plateau and rapidly engulfed Central Asian territories and became the first Central Asian transcontinental empire, spanning from Manchuria to the Black Sea. Early official texts and coins of the Turkish Khanate were all written in Sogdian, and it was the first Turkic state that used the name Turk politically. Then in 710, Umayyad Caliphate rose up. The Umayyads continued the Muslim conquest, incorporating much of Central Asia and the Iberian Peninsula into the Muslim world. At its greatest extent, the Umayyad Caliphate covered 11 million square kilometers, making it one of the largest empires in history in terms of actual land area. This Muslim Arab power shook up the diverse and established religions. So as a result, the 8th century was the dawn of the Islamic era in Samarkand. All religious temples were destroyed and replaced with mosques. A mass conversion to Islam soon followed, and in the subsequent years, Samarkand became an important location for Islamic and Arabic learning in Central Asia. The Umayyads were an Arab empire ruling over a population which was overwhelmingly non-Arab, and non-Arabs were treated as second-class citizens, regardless of whether or not they converted to Islam. And this discontent, cutting across faiths and ethnicities, ultimately led to the Umayyads' demise. The revolution essentially marked the end of the Arab Empire and the beginning of a more inclusive, multi-ethnic state in the Middle East. Remembered as one of the most well-organized revolutions during its period in history, it reorientated the focus of the Muslim world to the east and to the domination of the Abbasid Caliphate. Legend has it that during the Abbasid rule, the secret of papermaking was obtained from 2 Chinese prisoners from the Battle of Talas in 751, which led to the foundation of the first paper mill in the Islamic world, which was in Samarkand. But the Abbasid supremacy deteriorated, and Samarkand, along with other regions in Central Asia, were given away, creating the Samanids, who considered themselves to be the descendants of the Sassanian Empire. In a famous edict, Samanid authorities declared, "Here in this region, the language is Persian, and the kings of this realm are Persian kings." Fergana, Samarkand, and Bukhara were starting to be linguistically Persianized, and the language spread and led to the extinction of Eastern Iranian languages like Bactrian and Sogdian. But the Samanid power waned in the 10th century, issuing in the Turkic Karakhanid dynasty, meaning that Turks were back in power. The new Turkic Khanate took over much of Central Asia, displacing the Samanids, and ruled between 999 until 1211, another shift away from Iranian and Persian culture to Turkic predominance in Central Asia. Yet the Karakhanids gradually assimilated the Perso-Arab Muslim culture while retaining some of their native Turkic culture, creating something entirely new. Extinguished by the Khwarezmian Empire in 1213. It is estimated the Khwarezmian Empire spanned over an area between 2.3 million square kilometers and 3.6. It was a Turco-Persian Sunni Muslim empire that ruled large parts of present-day Central Asia, Afghanistan, and Iran in the approximate period between 1077 to 1231. But they did not get the rule over Samarkand for long, because the most devastating force that has ever descended upon the world up until then was about to be released. A mighty new warlord arose in the Far East going by the name of Genghis Khan. The chain of events that led to the Mongol invasion started when the Emperor Muhammad II of the Khwarezmian Empire broke a peace treaty. On Muhammad's orders, the governor of the city of Ottar arrested and put to death all the members of a Mongol trade caravan. Thereafter, when the Khan tried to avoid open war, sent 3 ambassadors. One was beheaded and the others were publicly humiliated. Outraged by this, Genghis left the wars he was fighting in China and prepared to attack the Khwarezm Empire. Terrible move, Muhammad. You literally pissed off the biggest badass in history, brought him west where he literally wrecked everyone. In the ensuing conflict, which lasted less than 2 years, the Khwarezmian Empire was annihilated. Genghis led a force of around 100,000 men and besieged the 3 leading eastern cities, Bukhara, Samarkand, and Urgench. And the citizens of the western cities of Merv and Nishapur were all put to the sword, making for one of the bloodiest wars in human history. So it was in March of 1220 when Genghis Khan arrived in Samarkand, which was fortified with at least 10,000 soldiers. As Genghis began his siege, his sons Chagatai and Ogadai joined him and the joint Mongol forces launched an assault on the city. On the 3rd day of fighting, the Samarkand garrison launched a counter-attack. Feigning retreat, Genghis drew approximately half of the garrison outside of the fortifications and slaughtered them in open combat. Muhammad attempted to relieve the city twice but was driven back each time, and Genghis triumphantly sacked the city. Living under the Mongols wasn't as bad as it is generally made out to be, however, or as you would expect given Mongolian reputation for rapid murder and torture, which for the most part was just a strategy Genghis employed in order to convince local rulers that submission was better than resistance. One reason why Mongols were quite successful in China and Central Asia was because they weren't always perceived to be the oppressors. For example, in the case of Khwarezmian Empire, the people were ordered to pay their taxes 1 year in advance. This was in order to build and prepare fortifications around Samarkand in anticipation of the Mongols. This strain on the people hardly retained their goodwill. On the other hand, the Mongols were actually known for making investments into the cities they conquered. One Chinese monk who visited Samarkand soon after its capture mentioned how amazed he was to see all of the craftsmen who had been brought from China and were working on rebuilding the city. This was a consistent pattern with the Mongols. Resources poured into towns that were sacked, revitalizing their communities. Representation of the Mongols as simple pillaging horseback riding savages is a misleading oversimplification. Still, the Mongolian Empire would not last for long and soon broke up with the untimely passing of Genghis in 1257. Internal power struggles divided the overstretched empire and it split into many factions, giving the opportunity for new power to arise. In 1365, in an uprising against Chagatai Mongols, the Timurid Empire was established, moving the region into a new and prosperous post-Mongolian era. Timur, otherwise known as Tamerlane, was a Turco-Mongol emperor who made Samarkand the capital of Timurid Empire in 1370. Timur is considered one of the few undefeated commanders in history and is widely regarded as one of the greatest military leaders and tacticians. He envisioned himself as the great restorer of the Mongol Empire of Genghis Khan and saw himself as his heir. In the 35 years that Timur presided over Samarkand, he massively expanded the city. He built an 8-kilometer long wall which fortified and separated Samarkand from its surrounding areas. He had roads made converging towards the city center, and as a result, the city flourished and became the center of Central Asia. Tamerlane's grandson, Ulugh Beg, began with the creation of the first of 3 madrasahs in Registan Square. The madrasah of Ulugh Beg, built between 1417 and 1421, reflects Ulugh's love for astronomy. The tiles form star-like geometric patterns, possibly as homage to his interests in astronomy. Ulugh Beg himself taught astronomy and mathematics there. The word madrasa literally means a place where learning and studying take place. Although it is common to present the madrasahs as a university, some authors note that it may be an exaggeration because the teachings given there were very much linked to Islam, as Ulugh was a very devoted Muslim, and the creation of various learning institutions led to many prominent figures in the field of mathematics and science converge on Samarkand. So Samarkand became the most important cultural, economic and scientific center in Central Asia. So the heyday of the Timurid Empire was also the real rise and the golden age of Samarkand. Unfortunately though, for Ulugh Beg, he wasn't as good at ruling as he was at science, and therefore he was overthrown and assassinated in 1449. starting the period of the Uzbeks. From the 16th century up to the middle of the 18th century, Samarkand was conquered and ruled by a series of Uzbek tribes, and the city became a part as well as the capital of the Bukhara Khanate, while towards the end of the 16th century, the Astrakhanids took over. This wasn't a bad time for the city, however, as it continued to grow and develop further, and between 1619 and 1636, the Sherdor Madras was constructed, standing opposite to the Ulugh Beg Madras. It is easily recognizable by the lion and deer mosaics on its facade, with the sun god inserted as a nod to Zoroastrianism. Its tiger mosaics with a rising sun on their backs are especially interesting and controversial for the depiction of living beings, which is something very much prohibited in Islam. Also, the Tilyakori Madras was built between 1646 and 1660, a residential college for students and also a mosque. This completed the architectural masterpiece that is Registan Square, one of the most spectacular and beautiful monuments of Central Asia. However, Samarkand saw an episode of decline following an attack by a new Persian king, Nader, in early 1720s. Nader rose during a period of massive turmoil in Iran, and he managed to reunite the Iranian realm. Nader idolized Genghis Khan and Timur, as he imitated their military prowess and cruelty. His victories during his campaigns briefly made him West Asia's most powerful sovereign, ruling over what was arguably the most powerful empire in the world. But his empire and the dynasty he founded quickly disintegrated after he was assassinated in 1747. After Nader's assassination, control was passed back to various tribes and khanates, ushering in the next conqueror of a legendary empire which is still the largest in existence today. Russians first came into contact with Central Asia in the 16th century, but they did not expand south because they were mostly seeking furs. The Siberian Cossacks were skilled in forest travel and knew little of the steppe lands of Central Asia. Also, the Siberian tribes were few and much weaker opponents, while the nomads of Central Asia were much more fearsome and warlike. However, after Peter the Great took the reins of Russia in 1682, he started expanding the empire in a southeasterly direction and towards the steppes of Central Asia, and as such, Russia crept up slowly and started enveloping the region. In 1864 and 68, they moved south, conquered Tashkent and Samarkand, and so the region of Uzbekistan came under the Imperial Russian rule after its cities were forcefully taken once more. At this point in time, Russia had built up a modern military with weapons and tactics superior to traditional Asian armies which they faced, making this conquest a rather easy affair on their part. In 1886, Samarkand became the capital of the newly formed Samarkand Oblast of Russian Turkestan, and regained even more importance when the Trans-Caspian Railway reached it in 1888, paving the way for new economic prosperity for the region. In addition, many public institutions were established, and the city and the country was greatly expanded. Overall, Russia didn't really do much of any kind of oppression in the region, and the net effect may have been positive for the Uzbeks, who enjoyed improvements in infrastructure. Russians were quite concerned about the stability of the region, and not wanting any unrest, were quite happy to give Uzbeks a fair amount of freedom in their lives. It is, however, argued that Russia managed to make its investments back by exploiting the region for cotton growth and by tapping into the resources of the Aral Sea and many of its tributaries, the effects of which have been quite devastating to the lands up until today. By the beginning of the 1920s, Central Asia was firmly in the hands of Russia, and despite some early resistance to the Bolsheviks, Uzbekistan and the rest of Central Asia became a part of the Soviet Union. So on the 27th of October 1924, the Uzbek Soviet Socialist Republic was created. The borders of political units in Central Asia were changed along ethnic lines as determined by Joseph Stalin. This wasn't great news for the Registan Square, which fell into disrepair and was abandoned. The socialist government, while prohibiting any religious worship, luckily chose not to destroy Registan, as it did with countless of its own monasteries. Probably just wasn't worth the effort. Between 1941 and 1945, during World War II, 1.4 million people from Uzbekistan fought in the Red Army against Nazi Germany. A number also fought on the German side, however. As many as 263,000 Uzbek soldiers died in the battlefields of the Eastern Front, and some 32,000 went missing in action. During World War II, many industries were relocated to Uzbekistan from vulnerable locations in western regions of the USSR to keep them safe. Large numbers of Russians, Ukrainians, and other nationalities accompanied these factories, altering the demographics of the republic and giving it a much more Russian character. On the positive side, only a small percentage of the population was literate before 1917. This percentage increased to nearly 100 under the Soviets.
segregated in a school for 100% Kazakhs with 100% communist-trained Russian teachers.
These Kazakh youngsters are taught exactly the same things as the children of Moscow, and in the Russian language. There would be no sense in them learning about the old Kazakh ways, for then they did not have the glorious freedom they are enjoying now.
On 31st of August 1991, Uzbekistan declared independence, leading up to the country and the city which exists today. It is difficult to really connect the dots here. The history of this region is so varied, so dramatic and quickly changing that drawing a line from its ancient roots or making any fascinating conclusions about the country of today is impossible. Uzbekistan of today is simply an amalgamation, thousands of years of different cultures mixing, coming together, falling apart, great leaders crushing and being crushed, empires spreading and collapsing. It is messy and chaotic. There is no way to keep it all in your head, to remember it or to make a sense of it. Today's country of Uzbekistan simply is unique, unlike anywhere else in the world, and I for sure would love to visit Samarkand and see Registan with my own eyes and feel the bustle of the markets of the Silk Road, which more or less are still there today. This is my Patreon map. I recently received my first pledge, and I could not be happier. Please consider putting yourself on this map by finding me on patreon.com/geoperspective. If you don't believe in donations, you could also visit geoperspective.org to view some of the maps that I have created. I have a particular soft spot for vintage relief maps, and I'm slowly building out a collection. All of these maps are unique, and you will only find them on my website, geoperspective.org, or my Etsy. Now, as always, have a guess where this footage was taken. Out.